Sup flappers, we are currently running one last giveaway for patch 1.4 between Jazzy and I. If you would like to enter this giveaway, please follow the instructions in the video linked on screen right now. I will be drawing the winners on this Saturday's live stream, and Jazzy will be drawing his set of winners during his live stream, which has been changed from Saturday to Monday. So there's actually 2 giveaways that you can enter. Do remember, you do not have to be a part of the live streams to win, but you will only have 24 hours to contact us to claim your prize. You will get everything you need to know in the video I linked earlier. Anyways, for Childe, there are some things we have to clear up first. He is not meant to be a main DPS. There is a lot of confusion amongst the community. While Childe can output good DPS, he works better as a Hydro Applicator support DPS or a burst support, rather than a straight up main DPS. Now, this does change with constellations, but that's an entirely different video. I'll go over it a little bit when I go over his constellations in this video. For this video, we will go over some DPS tips for Childe, talent priorities, constellation investments, best weapons from free-to-play all the way up to whale, and finally ending with some pros and cons. It's going to be a packed video, so do navigate to parts that you need most with the timestamps. Anyways, starting with the best Childe DPS rotation, it would be the 3-hit charge attack. This is his bread and butter and is similar to how Keqing does her attack rotation. When running Childe as a support DPS, do be careful to not let him hog up too much stamina, or else you may leave other units in a vulnerable spot. On screen, you will see what this 3-hit charge attack looks like. It's not difficult to perform and you get great results out of it. Moving on to talent priority. For on-hit Childe support DPS, definitely prioritize your elemental skill. For people who have not built Childe before, do not make the mistake of leveling up his normal attacks, as those are not what scales with his melee stance attacks. I cannot stress this enough. Prioritize Childe's elemental skill, as this is where his melee stance attack scales from, followed by, of course, his burst skill. Childe's normal attack talent really isn't that useful, so I would not really level it. And as you can see, I myself did not level this talent whatsoever, so you really don't need to use it in most comps. Those resources could be better spent elsewhere. And of course, if you're building Childe as a burst support, then just reverse it. Level up his burst first, then his elemental skill. Or you can just level up his burst if all you're using Childe for is that 1-hit vaporized burst. Okay, so let's go over Childe's constellations now. Looking at Childe's constellations at first glance, it may be a little confusing, especially for Constellation 4, but we'll go over each and every one of them, except for a Constellation 3 and 5, because we all know what those are. Let's see if you really need these constellations. So starting off with Constellation 1, this is a mediocre constellation compared to Ganyu and Hu Tao's constellation. This seems to be a straight up ripoff. While the effect is helpful, it is entirely not a necessary. I would not go for this whatsoever. So what about his second constellation? While it looks helpful, it's also rather lackluster. Gaining 4 energy per marked target killed sounds good on paper, but will only be helpful when fighting mobs and won't bring much to boss fights or against big mobs in the latter stages of the abyss. Now, as we continue, you'll start to see what Childe's constellation tree really is. So let's move on to Constellation 4. This constellation is great for periodic proccing, vaporizing, but will make it extremely difficult to properly time a large hit, as pretty much these riptide effects will just go crazy every couple seconds. So you're not going to be counting seconds in between, and with different enemies clumped up together, you're going to have different timing to take into consideration as well. So it really messes up large vaporized one-shot builds. However, starting with this constellation, Constellation 4, Childe starts to transition much better into a main on-hit carry while still needing a support to fill his off-field time. He brings much more to the table now. Also, this constellation is a buff to electro charge reaction with Beidou support DPS, as there is a lot more hydro reactions to be proccing electro charge, but it's not advised to go for this constellation if you want to play Childe through reactions. Finally, we have Constellation 6, the constellation to tie it all together. Remember when I said Childe's constellation all lead to something? Well, it's C6. It's really good. It turns Childe into a proper solo main DPS, and in combination with his Constellation 2, it essentially makes it so he can always be in melee stance. Is this constellation worth it though? Absolutely not. None of Childe's Constellation is worth it. If you are getting Childe, it's best to build him at Constellation 0 as a support Hydro Applicator or with Elemental Mastery for a huge Vaporize hit with his burst skill. You do not need his constellations whatsoever. They're not good for the value. They are not good for how much they cost. Just look at some of the newer constellations we have. For example, on Hu Tao Constellation 1, this constellation boosts her immensely. Same with Ganyu's Constellation 1. These constellations are really high in value for being very, very cheap. And now let's look at Childe's Constellation 1. It is absolutely not a comparison. miHoYo has been making big changes to character constellations, making it a lot more enticing and worth it to go for that C1 rather than hiding all of a unit's power in C6. And that is one of the biggest transitions going from before Zhongli and after Zhongli. Anyways, let's move on to Childe's weapons now. This can get really tricky. In fact, very few content creators go in depth talking about his weapons because his elemental skill is kind of weird when it comes to effects and whatnot. So I will be recommending some weapons, both free-to-play friendly and whale options. So starting with the free-to-play option, and that is the Wind Bloom bow that is currently available to get all the way up to Refinement 5. There is no excuse to not have this bow to Refinement 5 as it's literally free. This is a free-to-play weapon and it's as free-to-play as it gets, people. The bow has Elemental Mastery as its substat, which is superb for support DPS Childe, as well as its skill working flawlessly with Childe's elemental skill. Now moving on to other 4-star options, we have the Rust as well as the Stringless, which both are going to be great, but the Stringless will edge out on top just a little bit for support Vaporize Childe due to the fact that the Elemental Mastery is going to be a huge help. Of course, we also have the BP weapon for Childe, which is like a weaker version of the Skyward Harp, but is not necessary if you already have either the Rust or Stringless, as the difference will not really justify that price tag. But if you already have the BP bow, Childe will definitely make great use out of it, and it allows you to build a crit damage headpiece for his artifacts, and that's going to be a huge help. Finally, we have the 5-star options. Skyward Harp hands down will be the best option regardless of how you build Childe. The Amos bow is good due to its raw stats and can out DPS the 4-star options if all weapons are at Refinement 1. But once you start getting above R3 for the Rust and Stringless, they do outperform this bow due to skill bonuses, but a very powerful bow indeed. Now with the weapons over with, let's look at Childe's artifacts and their stat priority. Generally for support on hit Childe, you want to go for the 4-piece Heart of Depth with attack on your Sands, Hydro Damage Cup, and crit rate or crit damage for the headpiece, depending on your weapon. But if you're going for the Burst Vaporize Childe, you can run the 2-piece Hydro and 2-piece Noblesse with Elemental Mastery on your Sands, Hydro Damage on your Cup, and crit rate or crit damage headpiece, again depending on your weapon. Substat priority for Childe should be crit rate or crit damage into attack percentage, then Elemental Mastery, and finally flat attack for on hit Childe. For burst support, go for crit rate or crit damage into Elemental Mastery, then attack percentage, and finally energy recharge. As you see, Childe's artifacts may vary depending on what you are building for him, so do decide this before you pick him up, as artifact investment is no joke. Even for late game players, it's incredibly difficult and expensive to run 2 artifact sets for 1 unit. Now let's go over pros and cons. Childe is a hard hitter which can put heavy investment to good use, but suffers from his downtime. While let's all agree, there are few things more satisfying than watching Childe's Riptides shred enemies to pieces. Any big shielded enemies will be a hard counter to him, essentially forcing you to switch out and putting his skill into CD. Yes, Childe's elemental skill automatically enters cooldown once you switch out from him, so make sure everything is in place before his grand entrance. But if you do not want to rely for this satisfying on-hit build, you can build him as a burst support to avoid the downtime issues. And that's it for the video. Thank you for watching and good luck with the giveaway. You can find the link in the description. Good luck with your Childe summons as well, and I hope this helps out those who got spoofed by Childe as well on his banner when going for Rosaria. Until we meet again tomorrow, Flappers, stay safe and peace.